Are you stuck in the same old routine at work? Do you find yourself hitting a creative wall, unable to see beyond your current perspective? It's time to break free and unlock the power of fresh perspectives.
Well, it's hard to believe that we're already in season 2. However, I'm very happy because I get to talk to some different people, some new people. I enjoyed all the people last season, but we're going for some new ones. So I'm here today with Jenny Reilly. Welcome, Jenny.
Hello, David. Thank you for having me today.
So, Dave, my pleasure. Did I say pressure? Slip of the tongue. So Jenny, just before I know that one of the things you're passionate about is leadership, but I thought first you could just give a little context about what it is that you do, and then we'll
Yeah.
dive into leadership.
Okay, perfect. So I have my own business consulting company. I do a lot of business strategy with small to mid-sized businesses. And I also do a fair bit of executive coaching. So I work a lot with CEOs and C-suite and emerging leaders in organizations.
Okay, that sounds good. So, when I asked what are you passionate about, you said leadership, which is a huge topic. So, first of all, maybe you could tell me a little bit about why you're passionate about leadership, and then we'll dive into some of the different aspects that you're most passionate about.
Okay. So I love helping leaders be better professionally and personally. And I think from my own personal experience over the many years in managing teams, I felt, especially when I was at a position, I worked at an academic institution for about 18 years before I started up my own consulting company. And when I was there, I was dealing with a lot of individuals in industry. And as I was working my way up the career ladder, so were they. And a lot of the challenges that they are encountering as they were progressing in their career, I felt I could really assist with. So we definitely become, our leadership improves with time when we're very focused and when we can separate some of the areas in our life that are affecting how we lead people. And so I really decided that I would double down and kind of work specifically around the topic of leadership with individuals, which has then kind of, resulted in not only the consulting and the executive coaching, but I do a lot of leadership workshops and leadership retreats also.
So let's focus for a bit on the big guns. So what are sorry, I shouldn't be using a military example in this day and age. On the people that are higher up the food chain. Oh, I probably can't say that either. Anyhow, people that are in the C-suite. And so so you work with leaders at all kinds of different levels, I understand, but what are some of the, if any, unique challenges that those that are near the top of their organization face that others lower down may not actually have to deal with, if there are any?
Yeah. Well, there definitely are, and they're normally quite focused around the budgetary responsibility of keeping an organization running. And the weight that they have on their shoulders of ensuring if there isn't growth and targets are not being met, then obviously they're not, achieving their revenue results, which would mean that they may potentially have to decrease their workforce. And that's a huge amount of pressure on an individual when they either own or are running a company. And it's a pressure that a lot of individuals within the remainder of the organization can't really see or even fathom that level of responsibility. So people take that on and take it on, really dear to heart. The individuals that I work with, there's been many a tale, but like you can think back of when COVID, was about the amount of work that I was doing with CEOs on managing the stress levels of their workforce during a really difficult time for people professionally and personally. Very, very challenging. So I think those are unique. There are others that are very similar, though, to any emerging leader in an organization. So whether it's a C-suite that's running a $500 million company or running a $500,000 company, time management usually often comes up and the struggle between ensuring that there is sufficient time on the business, not just in the business, and that there's a balance between, and I don't mean a 50-50, but there is a sufficient time that's being spent with family and also on the business. some of the other common things that are coming up when I'm dealing with emerging or executives. So there's the time management, there's the whole organization piece around ensuring that they can get what they need, like at a touch point. So keeping themselves organized. One of the others is meetings. So we all have challenges around going to unnecessary meetings or long meetings. So tactics around that. And also keeping people engaged and them keeping their own motivation or their work mojo going, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And you know, I think sometimes there's an expectation on leaders, the next level up or two levels or three levels up, that because you got there, you must therefore know stuff that, it used to be you get ahead by knowing more than other people and being able to control it. And, now things are changing so quickly. It's impossible for the person at the top to know everything that they need to know. So how do you work with someone who may have been, a leader coming through the organization that has this view that they're supposed to know everything? Because I have a hunch that gets in the way of their willingness to acknowledge that there's an opportunity for them to get better, to take
Yes.
some leadership training or
Yeah,
coaching.
we definitely spend time on that. And the difference between a good leader and a great leader is a great leader will surround themselves with people that are smarter than they are. Right? They'll know that they don't have all the answers and then they need people that are expert in a certain area and they're willing to give them that responsibility to help support them. For individuals who are not and they have more of a controlling mindset and they want to be in charge of everything, it can work for a certain period of time, but it definitely they hit a wall and they hit a wall pretty quickly. Like in an executive level position, if they're not willing to bring their people up, right, within an organization and help support them, and in turn, they get supported themselves.
So I'm just going to explore a couple of things I'm just curious about. Like, do you find that there's a difference between leaders in a private organization and a public organization? Or I mean, most not-for-profits don't get to be that big, so let's just say any differences between public sector and private sector in terms of leadership and the challenges that they face, and how you end up coaching them to get better.
Yes. I think there are more challenges potentially for those that are in the private sector who have to generate money for their businesses versus an individual that would work in, I've worked in both. And in government, the budget is set and there is a little bit more, even though there may be, various cuts that you have to deal with at any given time, that same pressure to seed fund your organization is it's different. And for a nonprofit, the challenge is, always trying to actually do things on a shoestring, even though, of course, we always want to be efficient and effective, no matter whether it's public or private or a nonprofit. I think it definitely is. The way I would coach those individuals would be slightly different. And usually the topics of conversation are also a little different.
Okay, so I'm going to go back in time, in your time, I guess in my time as well. So most of my work is either in the private sector or public sector and not for profits, but I haven't done a lot in the university environment. And, the limited experience I've had is when someone gets to be the department head or the
Yes.
department chair, for some reason, it seems when their term is up, I have never seen such a sense of relief on their faces anywhere else. So, what is it about the in the university environment or post-secondary environment that's different from all those others, especially as it relates to leadership?
Well, academia definitely has its own challenges and constraints. I just read a really good book by one of the past presidents of UBC, Martha Piper, and so one of her colleagues, Indira, who went on to be the president of University of Alberta. And it was an excellent referral. Like one of my clients actually said, "Have you heard of this book?" And I didn't even realize they had written a book. And so I actually listened to it on audio. I didn't read it. I'm sorry. I listened to it when I was driving to client appointments. And it was so wonderful, like hearing the stories and the challenges they had in academia, also as the first female presidents of universities in Canada. It was quite unique. And for a department head, there are multiple reasons why professors will actually either put their hand up or it will be suggested that they take on these positions, where primarily they really, like for UBC, for example, they are more research focused, and it's not something that they necessarily will have as a goal, right, moving forward. So it is challenging for them to do the terms, and for some, if they want to move up the ladder in academia and go into, a provost or a vice provost or a president type of position over a department head or a dean level. It's usually like a dean level. It's unique that they choose that they choose that path.
Okay. So I'm just thinking about a whole pile of things I'm curious about, like leadership in a healthcare environment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Have you had an opportunity to work in healthcare?
Yes, I have. Like I've worked for one organization that was it was actually a private healthcare organization. And so individuals would pay an amount to actually, be associated with this like full service integrated care. And those individuals really wanted to be there and they wanted to provide the best level of service for their clients. And it was run like a business. So, yes, hospitals have administrators, but it's a little bit different in the fact that, well, I shouldn't say different, but it's a little different because in a private healthcare setting, where individuals are actually paying for that level of private healthcare, the expectations are so much higher. So the quality and the output is slightly different, if that makes sense. And then on the flip side too, even I have like one of my clients has a pediatric dental surgery, and she has various dentists working for her, and CDAs and front desk administrative staff, and that really is it is a business, right? So it's a for-profit business. So all of the mechanics behind a lot of our individuals that are going into healthcare positions, they're not trained in business administration. So it's doing a lot of that work with them to kind of get them up to speed to help them with their processes and how they will set up their work units to support them being successful in their business. Does
So
that make
this will be it. Yeah, it does, and it, of course it triggers about five other thoughts for me. And so, I'm just thinking about leadership in. I did some work for a company that I shall not mention, but they get paid an incredible amount of money. And I remember the head of that group having a real tough time, even just getting people to shut off their cell phones in this meeting because they were all multimillionaires, right? And they just kind of say, "Forget it." And I've sometimes seen that in public health care as well, where you have a certain amount of influence or control, maybe over the nurses or the nurse practitioners or whoever, but it's so hard to get physicians and surgeons to stay. So, do you have any suggestions on tips that a leader can use when he or she does not have formal power or organizational power over the people that report into them? Like, what can you do in a situation like that?
Mhm. It's a challenge, but really, I think what you've got to do is every person that you deal with has their own psychology made up of their background. What I will often do with individuals when they're working within a team where some of the individuals may not necessarily want to be there or have chosen them to be their leader is we'll do a deep dive into the characteristics of the team members that are there, working out how we can best communicate with them to their strengths, because everybody receives information differently. So I think that's one of the keys because people will often think, well, I'm going to come in and I'm going to lead this one certain way. To be super effective, you actually need to pivot depending on how the other person is receiving the information, on how you give the information to them to ensure that it's actually getting to the point. So I do a fair bit of work with individuals on that side of things, how they can improve their communication skills to get the most out of their team and also to turn people to see things at glass half full versus glass half empty. right? So there's a lot that we talk about there. When you have an individual that's working for you that is negative or demotivated, you really want them and you can see the strengths that they have and you can see their potential, but they personally can't, or there's something else going on in their life that's preventing them. How do we help turn that around so they can have an engaging experience in the workplace? And so too, that relationship can improve.
So it's kind of a good news, bad news scenario because the good news is that if I figure that out, I can help them. I can lead more effectively. The bad news is I have to tailor the way I connect with everybody, and that it's not an easy thing. You brought this up a little bit earlier, indirectly, or if you didn't, I imagine that you did. And what if any of you noticed the differences between the way that you know men versus women lead? Depending upon the organization, and also sometimes people from different cultures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're seeing a lot of changes in there. But how does it shift the way that? What are some of the issues that you see that come up when it's like the first female leader that we've ever had, or the first, this, that, and the other thing? Like it's got to be pretty tough. And I imagine that trying to be like a male leader is probably not the key to success.
No, it is not. And I think that's been a kind of a challenge for many decades for women that are moving up. So I'll talk about the female side of the equation first, and then I'll go into people coming into different experiences with different cultural backgrounds. For women leaders who are going into an organization or who are starting their organization and then they get to a point where they're extremely successful, what we really need to do is we need to kind of look at the challenges that they have had to get there to actually get into that level. And they've had to be quite dynamic to get there and be able to read a room and prove themselves continually. And I can just speak for myself, really, but as you can hear by my accent, growing up in Australia, I'm 55 now. So the era that I was growing up in my 20s, it was a very different environment for females working their way up in an organization. It was very male dominated in the leadership positions. And so I really had to continually prove myself, but be not frightened to have a voice and an opinion and not pretend to act like a man, to be myself, but to prove that I did have a point and to prove through work ethic and through contributions that I could make a difference. And that's how I worked my way up. And then now, into having my own business. I think now some of those challenges are definitely still at play, but to a different degree in 2024, right? So, we've seen with recent movements, I think the challenges have been brought to light. So I think women in leadership positions, there is definitely more openness and more ability to move towards equity, but it's still not there, especially in certain sectors that I deal with. It's still very, I'll go into many different types of environments where I'm going in and I'm facilitating different meetings with senior management, and I'll still only be the only female around the table as a consultant. So there's not a full-time, female in a leadership position there. And I'm always trying to push the boundaries on that. Like, we need to have diversity in our leadership teams to ensure that we're fulfilling not only what our people need, but also what our clients need. Um, and then going on to how difficult is it from somebody coming in for potentially another country into Canada, into a leadership position, or if for your listeners who are in other countries, yes, of course, we need to kind of adapt to the cultural setting that we're in versus bringing all our own cultural norms, because we do behave differently in business situations. I did a lot of work with companies in Japan for about 14 years between Canada and Japan, Canadian academic institutions and Japanese technology businesses. And how I would interact and facilitate a meeting in Canada is obviously completely different to how I would do it in Japan. So the respect and the cultural knowledge of the facilitation there was really important. So when somebody is coming into an organization here or wherever you are based, they have to take the responsibility to be aware of who their people are, the company culture, but also the country culture that they're working within.
But I would hope that you don't get totally that person doesn't get totally amalgamated in the Borg, because there are things from other cultures that are worthwhile bringing in. I guess it's just a matter of taking the first step towards the current culture before starting to introduce other things, which is which is kind of tough. Hmm. So I'm going to keep asking questions because
Indeed.
I know you have another appointment. I'm going to do my best to see if you're willing to be late for it. No, I'm just kidding. So, so how about leadership post COVID? Any differences that you've noticed there?
Absolutely.
Or any requirements of leaders that are different?
Absolutely. So we have more individuals that are working remote or in hybrid settings than we've ever had, right? And it's really exciting. It's also very interesting and challenging for leaders is when they had people, and especially for a lot of companies have gone to, for example, 2 to 3 days minimum in the office versus before there wasn't even an opportunity for them to have any days out of the office. And working with, and one company that I do a lot of work with, they're completely asynchronous and all remote, fully remote.
Wow.
Their employees are all around the world. Their teams are all from different countries. So, and sometimes when I'm dealing with that particular company in the morning, I might be dealing with one of their leaders who is in Brazil, and then I might have a call with another one that's in the UK. And then I'll kind of work my way to having, I'll have a call with somebody in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, right, by lunchtime. And it works well because they've got methodologies in place on how they can continually be in contact with one another. I'm not talking 24 hours a day. Well, asynchronous is that you're kind of working continually and remotely, but when they're on their hours in the day, so that there's a complete stream like of connection. And that doesn't necessarily have to be done by video or phone. They can also have Slack channels that are going because communication is more important than ever when you're remote because you can miss those idiosyncrasies that we kind of sometimes have when we're face to face. So the old water cooler conversations have to be done a different way because they're valuable. So it's the leader's responsibility to ensure that those types of connections and communications are still occurring. And it can definitely be done, but it takes a lot of work to kind of get there because it's still relatively new to so many people.
And I'm surmising that trying to go back to the way it was before COVID-19 is never going to work, right? And impose it back to the way it was.
Well,
Do you find,
there are some companies that definitely have, and it's worked just fine because that was the expectation. And it was for a period of time.
oh,
Those that
okay.
are in-person client facing, where they needed to provide a service face to face, obviously, then that's there. But for the others, it's very difficult to have gone full-time remote and then advise individuals that their productivity is not the same when they're remote than when they're there. And there's many different arguments and different type of research papers that have been formulated on this. If you have the right structure in place for remote work, it definitely can be as or more productive than in person. But if you do not, then obviously you're going to weigh the chance of people not being as productive. So a lot of companies that are moving the remote, they're very open with their employees that they have different types of software or apps that they will implement so they can see, so there's a dashboard for the leader who could be, in a different country or even in the same country or city where they can track who's online, how many calls are being taken, how many emails are going. There's a tracking system. And so I get a lot of questions from leaders about the backlash or the pushback
Mhm.
from that. But purely, if we are working and we're going to be accountable, and for a business owner, the bottom line is there has to be profitability. We need to make sure that our people are actually contributing. There has to be some type of measures that we put in place, but we don't want to feel like Big Brother, right? So there has to be some type of freedom around how they do what they do and the confidence that they are going to be doing the right job, but with at the same time with some support and accountability that's in play.
Well, and I find in those cases, it's probably better to involve the people that are going to be on the receiving end as well, rather than just imposing it. Through COVID, one of my clients said, once we come out of, well, actually in the midst of COVID-19, that one of your jobs is to remind people what they are actually capable of doing when they put their minds to it.
Yeah.
Because they've been talking about projects that, oh, it's going to take 3 months, it's going to take, 6 months to do all these kinds of things. And COVID came along, 2 weeks, boom, 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 all
Yeah.
this going on. So, they are incredibly capable. Mind you, they have to be, wanting to do that, but, they're pretty amazing people.
Yeah.
Uh, so One of the last questions I want to ask you, Jenny, it's one of my favorite ones. And you can set the context for this, which is what's one lesson about leadership as a leader or seeing other leaders? But what's one lesson about leadership that you wish you'd learned either earlier or less painfully?
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a minute to think about that.
No, I've got one, and it seems to come up a lot even in conversations with leaders. When we are looking after a team or a unit, or even have a whole company, right? That we're responsible for. We get very invested in those that we work with, and sometimes it's very challenging if people aren't in the right seats in the organization, or some people refer to as if you're not in the right seat in the bus, kind of thing. And that we are doing them a disservice if we're not honest, right? And upfront and letting them know when they're not meeting expectations. They may be the nicest person, but if they don't know, and it's really hard to give that feedback, we're doing them a disservice because they're otherwise, they could reach the potential. Sometimes they're just totally not the right fit, and we may have to let them go. But it's ensuring that action is taken way earlier than later. So there's been multiple times in my past where I've tried to really hold on, right, and really try and nurture and coach and train that individual. But for whatever reason, it's just not quite the right fit. Or if somebody's been promoted to a level of incompetence. So we will often promote people when they're doing really, really well at their job because they're a superstar at that particular level. And they might not even want to go to the next level, but we promote them anyway because we think that they're going to be able to blow that out of the park. But we promote sometimes to a level of incompetence. So I think for me, the lesson is to act and act quickly around performance. Don't drag it out. If the performance isn't there and you're unable to change the behavior, then it's time to make a change. And from a leadership perspective, if you don't, you're being looked at from all other avenues in your organization. So not only are you affecting that individual, but you're affecting the motivation of everybody else that's around them, which inevitably lays on your shoulders, right? So you have to take full responsibility for that. So it's having the courage to make those difficult decisions and act on them.
There's a fellow, I believe his name is Richard Heifetz, that wrote a book. I believe the title was Leadership with No Easy Answers.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to lead, it's almost what goes along with that. If your expectation is to be liked, you're not going to be a very effective leader because there's going to be some things you have to do that people don't like, but it's the right thing to do. Just as you've described.
Mm-hmm.
Jenny, it's been wonderful having a conversation with you today. I hope I'm sure the leaders have got some other perspectives on this, and I will ask you to let me know after the call's over what your website is, because there may be other people that want to hire you to work with their leaders.
Excellent. That would be great, David. I'll definitely pass that information on to you. And thank you so much for having me today.
It's been my pleasure. David Guthrow here with Jenny Reilly. Discover Fresh Perspective. I look forward to having you listen to the next one next week. Thank you very much.
Subscribe now because on Fresh Perspectives, every episode is an opportunity to explore new horizons and redefine what's achievable.